How's it going, everyone? And welcome back to Roll On Gaming. I know it's been a while, but we're here and we have to be here right now because there are some crazy things going on in the world of Star Wars Unlimited. But before we get into all that, of course, my name is Kevin, and with me, as always, is my brother Corwin. Corwin, how are we feeling about all this?
The major shakeups for sure. I think it's going to be a brand new game for the rest of set four, which is pretty exciting. Django was certainly dominant in a way we hadn't seen before. It's good to see him off the table and ready to open up some other stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So, obviously, the news of the week Jango Fett, Triple Dark Raid, and DJ all have been suspended. They joined Boba Fett, the leader, the first leader from Sparker Rebellion, in being suspended, which makes 4 cunning cards on the suspension list and nothing from any other aspect, which is interesting of itself. We're not going to get too deep into the past being the suspension list. What's done is done, and we are looking forward on this episode. But I do want to sort of get your sense, Corwin, at not what your reaction is to the suspensions, because I think overall it's been received in a positive way. But I want to get your sense of, pumping the brakes a little bit on anybody that thinks cunning is all of a sudden this unplayable aspect that we shouldn't worry about at all. Because I feel like it's the opposite. Cunning's still in a
Oh,
very good spot.
if that sentiment is out there, yeah, that's not a thing. Cunning is a very strong aspect. We've known that from day one. It will continue to be so. I think we'll see that borne out in some of the discussion we have today. And I still think if you're in a competitive mindset, you have to consider cunning as one of your top options.
Yeah, and even in cutting villainy, maybe you're not necessarily leaning on the crutch that was Triple Dark Raid, but there's still plenty of options for you to succeed. So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna go through some of the decks that you might be seeing in store showdowns, planetary qualifiers, sector championships. Now that Django, Han, and Triple Dark Raid, not Han, DJ, who was very popular in Han and Triple Dark Raid have now been have gone the way of the Dodo Bird. So I want to start off with the obvious, and then we'll get into some of the less obvious. So let's kick things off by talking about, speaking of cunning, Quinlan Voss. Um, I think my biggest fear when these suspensions were announced, and maybe you can sort of dispel me of this, Corwin, is with Django off the table, uh, Han Solo, who we'll talk about in a bit, taking a hit for sure, that Quinlan Voss is the new big bad in the format. Quinlan Tarkentown has definitely seen its share of high placement. It's a very strong deck, especially with the options to ping and as well as discard and force throw and things like that. So is Quinlan now the one that we all need to be worrying about, or is it just a good deck in a sea of good decks?
Well, I think Quinlan is definitely going to be up there. The deck was performing even with Django in play in set three, and then obviously set four we don't really count because it's so Django dominated.
Yeah.
But if you weren't playing Django, Quinlan I think was one of the best options you could choose. And so I think that now that Django's out, Quinlan is definitely going to wrestle for the top spot. Specifically talking about Quinlan with Tarkentown. Although I think the green version of Quinlan is also pretty good and interesting. But Tarkentown, I mean, Quinlan's just fairly reliably being able to generate that ping damage and the early removal of a unit is just kind of what you want. When you're an aggro deck and you're going to execute your game plan anyway, and along the way you're able to take out um, an enemy unit in opposition. I think it's going to be a really strong deck. Not to mention the fact that all the force synergies that it gives you means that force throw, one of the best cards in the game, is going to be online a lot of the time. So really like Quinlan with red for that reason, and still think that the Tarkentown version is going to be a major contender in competitive play.
Yeah, you brought up an interesting point, and they talked about this on the stream a little bit, the meta check-in stream, that they didn't really grasp the full power level of Triple Dark Raid until we hit set 4, which was the vehicle focus set. Now we're going to be going into Legends of the Force set 5 here in July, and they've already got their eyes on some of the Force cards
Hmm.
that enable these Force synergies. Are you concerned at all about Force Throw as a potential next problematic card that we need to be watching with great interest here?
I don't know that it's rising to the level of suspension for me, but I do think the more reliable it becomes, the more dangerous it becomes. And so it should be on the short list of cards to watch in a meta that will eventually potentially evolve into more force heavy. But for right now, I mean, part of Quinlan's appeal is the fact that he can flip on 5 as a force unit, which is pretty hard to do elsewhere. And so I think that makes him really strong.
Five drop Force units, 5 deploy Force units. Break out your Chirrits is what you're telling me. Great, good to know. All right. So we talked a little bit about Han Solo. This was a deck that was also very popular because of the Tech and DJ shenanigans. But lest we forget, Han Solo was still pretty darn good without the use of DJ. So with that in mind, where do you see Han fitting in now that he's lost his most unfortunate play experience, but as we know in this game, resource cheating is still very good.
Yeah, it is. And it's one of the reasons why you shouldn't not consider playing cunning. You've got cunning leaders that are able to kind of break the resource curve like Han, and Han probably does it better than anybody. And so I still think that the Han decks in any flavor, quite frankly, yellow, green, red, or even blue, I think they all can be very good for that reason. Anytime you're able to get turn one, ahead of curve with a 3 drop, and then, deploy. Basically, you can basically treat Han as a 5 deploy, not a 6 deploy, and that I just think there's still going to be really strong interactions there. The DJ hit is going to mean that he maybe doesn't have as much play into more mid-rangey and control decks, just in terms of like keeping them off their leader deploy. But it doesn't mean that he can't ramp as effectively. And so that's where a lot of the strength of the deck comes. And I think, especially in green, when you can potentially resupply your way into like a turn 2 or 3 flip like this, it gets to be pretty bananas pretty quickly. So I still think Han is a great choice, and it's going to be all over the meta, in my opinion.
I'd still be worried about Han if I was sitting down at a tournament. A point that I want to hit on that you brought up there, which is interesting to me, is Han into mid range, Han into 6 deploy leaders, things like that. I think now that we've seen DJ go away, and we've seen some of these other problematic pieces go away, I think there's room for 6 deploy leaders to flourish a little bit more than they have been. And if
Yes,
and if
yes,
Han struggles into those, then there's an argument to be made that maybe there's a little bit of a step back that Han's going to take. Because I do think people are going to be taking more chances with these 6 deploy leaders, and I think that's great. I think opening up the leader pool to not feel like 6 or even 7 is problematic anymore is good for the health of the game. As someone who plays a lot of 6 deploy leaders, I can certainly speak for that. But if that is the case, then maybe there's a world in which Han sort of gets outclassed in the end game. It's hard to imagine that, just because, again, especially if you talk about Han with command, being able to get up there so quickly in resources is something that's very attractive about that pairing. But if he doesn't draw his late game answers, there's definitely a world in which he could struggle.
yeah. I mean, I think the ramp aspect of it and the reliability of the ramp is what keeps him on par with the decks that want to go longer. Because while they want to go longer, he's able to get to his big stuff either on par or ahead of the 6 and 7 deploy leaders, and so it still becomes a very fair fight. Um, but the ability to control those decks more heavily by denying them resources and leader deploy, that's the element that will now be missing. And so it just will create a sort of a different win condition for the deck.
Yeah, well, I think a more fair win condition, which you're not going to catch me complaining about. So let's continue in the cunning theme again. We're hammering this point home that cunning is fine. Everybody, nobody panic. And let's talk about Cad Bane here. Does Cad Bane? I mean, I'm just going to sort of be blunt about this. Does Cad Bane just slot in for Django and that's all she wrote?
Potentially, I mean, Cad Bane, as we saw like in Atlanta, what was it, 2 weeks ago? Cad Bane had some play into Django. Um, so now I feel like, from a villain cunning perspective, Cad is probably one of the better choices. Like I I don't know. Um, I'm having a hard time thinking of a better one right now. So, the underworld synergies are really strong, and that's what obviously makes Cad good.
Yep.
Um, and I think, again, another leader that you can consider a variety of aspects with. He's good in red, he's good in blue, he's good in green, uh, he's good in double yellow. So I think Cad warrants strong consideration as well, with the underworld package being as strong as it is.
So off the top of the dome, you've got Cad Bane in villainy cunning. You've got Boba Fett and Jango Fett gone. So what does that leave you? That leaves you Grand Admiral Thrawn from Spark of Rebellion. That's a no.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Aphra from Shadows of the Galaxy. That's a no. And then you get into Twilight of the Republic. I mean, we're forgettable at this point. Uh, Jump to Lightspeed. Rio Durant. That's also a no. So there's not much there, and of course Admiral Trench, which is everybody's favorite. Um,
Yeah.
dicey at best. So if you're looking to play cunning villainy, and that's what you're looking for out of your leader, because you want to play something like a Tarkin Town or an Energy Conversion Lab, or even some of these new bases that are cropping up, these new rare bases that have more than 30 health. I mean, we've been seeing some play out of Data Vault and Colossus recently
Mm-hmm.
that have really been doing some serious work. So if you're looking to run either Data Vault or Colossus or Tarkin Town or ECL, and you need a cunning leader in villainy, Cad Bane is it. I realize that's a lot of qualifiers that I just said there, but you're really, with Django and Boba gone, you're really not getting much else out of that position. Oh, I forgot General Grievous from Twilight of the Republic. Sorry everybody.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is why I was having trouble finding a comparable. Yeah, there just isn't really one right now, and so um, Cad is gonna rise to the top of that group and be an attractive option for folks who still want to stay in these yellow black aspects.
Yeah. Yeah. Just no triple dark raid. Sorry everybody. Uh, all right. So what about aggro? Right. So for the longest time in Star Wars Unlimited, I feel like Sabine has just been sort of looming over the competition, but I feel like we've also found that recently, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it recently, like, that's been more of a ghost story than an actual, you know, uh statistic on the table. I think there are still people who are playing Sabine, but it was pushed out by a lot of these other mid-range options that were just doing work, being able to kill early units, being able to exhaust things down, things like that. So, if that's the case, with all these other things gone, where do you see an aggro deck like a Sabine slotting into this new environment?
I think she'll slot in very well. I think the Django was obviously the aggro deck of the format and was bullying out the other aggro decks because of its ability to kill early units and exhaust boards. But now that those effects are not really in the game, Sabine was always the premier aggro deck and like kind of the litmus test for you. Like if you were trying to beat aggro, you needed to have a good win rate against Sabine, and if you didn't, then you may not have a deck. That I think is still going to be very true.
Yep.
Sabine hasn't gone anywhere and hasn't gone any weaker. In fact, all these other rebels came out and jumped to light speed that she can now deploy to her benefit, and so she definitely got more tools And so finding the right ones and piecing the deck together again with set four in mind, I think will be the challenge. But I definitely think she has a place, and if it's true that we're going to see more um, longer deploy leaders coming into play, you know, she's going to be very favored into those matchups.
Yeah, she'll definitely feast on that. Do you think that with the advent of some of these new rebels that people should be looking at Sabine, or should they take another look at Leia? Because we did see a Lake Country Leia do very well in one of the sector qualifiers.
Yeah, I mean, I think Leia's problem in the past was that she really couldn't beat Sabine, and so the difference there is like ECL versus Tarkentown, and the fact that Sabine gets access to ECL Wrecker and Leia doesn't.
Yeah,
That's really the difference.
yeah,
And even ECL Poe, like those are still, even when Django was alive and well, those were still some of the most powerful things you can do in the game.
yeah,
And the fact that Leia can't do that, I think, limits her in a way that Sabine is not limited.
yeah. I just got PTSD from you mentioning ECL Wrecker. I can't with that combo. It's
It's gross.
so brutal, so brutal. But if you're like me and you don't play in the ground arena anymore, then it's not so scary anymore. So there's always that. Um, so speaking of not playing in the ground arena, we got to talk about Admiral Piet, right? So
Yeah.
I, Piet is a tricky one for me because this is one that I was really hyped about. Obviously, hello Star Destroyers, duh. Um, but then it was widely anticipated that Piet would do well. I don't think he did as well as some of the projections were showing, and also didn't do as well in outside of it. It did well in the sense that it did well in yellow, but it didn't do as well in like the blue and the red variants that people might have expected. So now Triple Dark Raid gone. Piet yellow probably doesn't. He probably loses a lot with that, but that potentially opens the door again for the red and the blue variants to shine, especially now that these giant star destroyers and things that you're dropping, these capital ships, aren't just getting tapped down willy nilly. So is this really the opening that Piet needed to actually live up to his potential? I think it might be, which is actually a really exciting thing for someone who just likes playing big ships like I do.
Yeah, I think Piet will be well represented. I think there's enough people that like the play style that will want to jump on it. And like you said, people love playing big ships. It's fun. It's a fun deck to play and to pilot, um, and it can do some very unfair things when it's allowed to. And so I definitely think Piet will have a place. I personally feel like the yellow version is probably dead.
Yeah,
um, Triple Dark Raid made that deck. It no longer is eligible to be played, and therefore I just don't see yellow really passing muster anymore. But red and blue to me still feel really strong. So I like Piet quite a bit to make an imprint in this new meta.
yeah, and I just don't think the level of capital ship lives up in cunning
That's
to
what it is.
things like vigilance and aggression. You have Radiant 7, you have the new Sea Rock cruiser. I don't actually remember. Oh, the corporate cruiser. And then you have Chimera, which is, yeah, I mean, it's shielded, but like, what else does it do for you, really?
Mhm.
Beyond that, you really don't have much. So, you know, when faced with those three things against something like Devastator and Planetary Bombardment and Ruthless Raider, or something like um, the Relief Runner and Avenger and Annihilator and Fleet Interdictor, which is my new favorite Star Destroyer. We love a Fleet Interdictor around here.
A good card. Yep.
Um, it doesn't really hold up, and sure, you can bring more tricks with you, but you need impactful top end, especially if your whole deck is based around top end, and you're not going to get as much of it in cunning without some of these tricks.
Yeah, I think that's right. It just yellow doesn't have comparable top end ships
Mhm.
in the way that blue and red do, and so I just don't think you can play that deck anymore.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. But definitely be playing plenty of Piet as soon as I get done uh, abusing myself of Vader decks, because it's just what I do. And then finally, we got to talk about Ray. Um, Ray is an
Yeah.
interesting one. One, I put it in here because it's you, and you are one of the best Ray players. I would put you up against any Ray player in the world. But that's also, because I'm biased. But aside from that, Ray is one that was really doing well. Ray Tarkentown and other Ray variants had play just because of all the things that she can do with giving extra power to the units, and again, providing things like restore and access to force throw and all this other stuff. And then just sort of took a back seat to the Jangos and the Quinlins of the world. um and to some respect the Hans, again, because it's a 6 deploy. So now that those things have been removed, at least for the moment, as a Ray player, where do you think Ray is positioned in this new meta?
Well, thanks for mentioning her, because if you didn't, I would have.
Yeah.
I do think that Ray is gonna play,
Hmm.
and I think I think Ray's biggest issue is she has a Quinlan problem.
Yep.
The Quinlan Tarkentown matchup is very difficult. Certainly one that I've struggled with quite a bit. But she has a lot of answers to a lot of things that the meta was already trying to do, and now is going to continue to do with Django out. And in addition to that, she got a couple of really nice pieces from set four. Black one is phenomenal with Ray. Being able to generate a 4/4 space unit for 3 is really strong. Um, and uh, Profundity on her top end, just adding to the additional discard synergies that she's already trying to execute while providing a very strong body and space at the end of the game. These are cards that I think, and there's others too, but those are the two that really stand out to me as someone who played almost exclusively Ray Tarkentown. Those are really good options for her, to help her kind of get there. And so between the levels of hand control and board control that she can provide, force throw, pillage, the discard package, but also just being able to set up really good 2-for-1 trades with her ability. Plus, adding the restore, I think there's tools there. There's definitely tools there to succeed, and I think she will find a resurgence now that we've seen Django go by the wayside.
Yeah, that's just what Piet players want to hear, is more discard decks. That's great. We love to hear that. Um, no, the Ray discard package, it may not be on the level of potentially the Quinlan discard package with things like Jam Communications and Ahsoka and Spark and Kira,
Yeah,
technically, more or less, but those force throws and those pillages really do hurt. And having a having a profundity in your back pocket in the late game is a little concerning. um but
well, and as it
yeah.
turns out, like if you can reliably, and this is another reason why like the DJ thing was big for Ray, because if you can reliably flip and protect Ray, I mean, no one else in the game is restoring 3 on the flip,
Right.
and that's a really powerful offering that Ray has that no other deck really does.
Yeah, I mean, Ray's restoring 3 around earlier than Luke would be, and Luke would have to attack to get his off. So
Exactly. Yep.
um that restore 3 is really strong. I think that's probably, when Ray was revealed and we saw how understated she was for a 6 deploy, I think it's become more and more clear just how much that restore 3 has been valued, and rightfully so. um so so these are just some of the leaders that I think we're pretty confident in, right? Doing fairly well into this new meta and this new environment that we find ourselves in. I want to talk about a couple other archetypes that we are going to be looking at. And firstly, I want to talk about pilots, because piloting is a mechanic that I think had a lot more hope attached to it, than say, coordinate or things like capture, when those were introduced into Star Wars Unlimited. Because piloting can bring about some really big swings and some really potentially strong, combinations and things like that go with him. But it really just felt bad playing a pilot on your first action of the round, only to get that unit exhausted by Jango. Just not a
Mhm.
good feeling. And there's still counterplay to pilots outside of Jango. Don't get me wrong. Waylaying a unit with a pilot on is still gonna suck. Deploying your leader onto, after you've waited 4 or 5 rounds to get it out, only to have it be confiscated, is still gonna suck, right? But on the whole, it does feel like there's a little bit more optimism in the pilot camp, because now, maybe the counterplay has to come a little bit more fairly, and it's not gonna feel like a waste of your entire round trying to get these things out. Where do you land on pilots?
I think those are all very sound points. I think where I stand with pilots right now is even if pilot leaders may not necessarily be amongst the top options that we just mentioned, you have to respect them. And not only do you have to respect the leaders, but you have to respect some of the actual pilots that are coming into play. Chewbacca is a real threat that your opponent can present to you. The new Darth Vader is a real threat that your opponent can present to you. Uh, Wedge decks being able to cheat these powerful pilot upgrades out for less and help with its resource curve is something that you need to respect. So for me, it's a bit of a boon to pilots that these changes happen this week. I don't know that it elevates them all the way up to where they're going to be meta staples. Because I think some of the interactions are just too slow. And if you ask me why Poe isn't doing well, that's my number one reason why. He's just way too slow and doesn't actually affect the game state enough when he attaches to really make a difference. Um, but I do think that some of the more powerful pilots in the game are very worthy of deck slots right now, and you have to respect that those exist and be ready for them.
Who would you put in that echelon of the more powerful pilot leaders in the game right now?
Well, Vader is probably number one for me. I,
Wow,
I think
number
I
one.
think Vader I think Vader loved the news that came down this week, and I think Vader is really, really well positioned with its deck composition to potentially impact the meta. And that may or may not have anything to do with how badly you've kicked my butt with him over the past couple of weeks. But independent of that, I think Vader has a lot of tools to succeed. I can't say the same for Luke because Luke, I mean, as someone who's played some Luke recently, it bamboozle just that interaction just feels so bad. When you have basically a silver bullet that exists that invalidates your entire leader, like because you're playing Luke so that you can avoid the confiscates and the waylays and all that of the world. Um, a bamboozle, which is potentially a free card for your opponent that can wreck your leader deploy, is just that to me. Like Luke will never succeed for that reason. If he ever gets popular, people will just pack bamboozle everywhere, and that'll be that.
But if the one pilot leader that has protection from being removed by these other cards that Luke has, is so susceptible to bamboozle, or and therefore invalidated, what hope does that give to these other pilots that are also susceptible to bamboozle and everything else?
I mean, it's always going to be a risk, but
Right.
I think the threats that those decks are presenting along the way is what makes them more powerful. And so, um, Vader in particular, I think. I mean, you have to deal with even a Tie Fighter absorbing a Vader pilot and becoming a 6/6. Like that's a real that is a real threat to deal with. And of course, this is similar to your Wedges and your Lukes and everybody else,
Yep.
but um, the way at which Vader can reliably generate ties to attach to. He's bringing other pilots to his cause along the way that you're having to deal with. In a similar way that Wedge is, almost every turn you're having to deal with a piloted ship. It seems to me that's where the difference lies. It's like Vader's a little bit harder to control because it's the Tie fighters always give him options, and there are some very aggressive ships in villainy that can output a lot of damage quickly. So I think Vader's my top dog. I think Wedge is probably my number two,
Hmm.
and everything else is just kind of in a tier below.
So Luke's power level and effectiveness is tied to his leader ability, his leader unit ability, where he's
Yeah,
protected. Whereas these other leaders like Vader and Wedge are more tied to what's around them, and that gives them a little bit more uh, of a boost, is what you're saying.
I think so. I mean, Wedge is giving you resource generation.
Yep.
Vader is giving you extra bodies in space. Luke is pinging a guy. I mean, that's still impactful. Don't get me wrong.
Yep.
Um, but I think in terms of like setup for the flip and deploy, there's a little bit extra value in terms of what I see when I see Vader and Wedge.
So pilots is one area that I wanted to discuss, and also like control is another area I wanted to discuss. But I want to bridge that gap by talking about two leaders, one being a pilot and one being a little bit more controlling and also not a pilot, because I want to hit on shields and their value now that the amount of decks that can ping willy nilly has been reduced by one. So I want to talk about Lando and I want to talk about the original Luke Skywalker from Spark of Rebellion, because these are two shield generating leaders that could find themselves, at least I think, in a really good spot now that the shields aren't being removed as easily as they were previously. Look, War Juggernaut is still going to be a good card. Quinlan Voss is still going to be around to deliver pings and things like that. But aside from those things, I think shields become more effective, and that makes leaders like Lando and Luke more attractive to me going into some of these other options. So where do you land on how shields are positioned now, as it relates to some of the other decks that are going to be out there?
Well, I think shields were already good before the suspensions because they prevented Django from exhausting your units. So if they were already good before the suspensions, I still feel like they will be now. I think they don't they do and they don't feel as good into like indirect damage decks, right? Because you can just it
Yep.
just gets under the shields. Um and I still think Lando has a long way to go to become viable. That's just my own personal opinion. I do like Luke quite a bit. We saw Luke have some success in Denver with Data Vault. That's a deck I've definitely had my eye on this set. I just think shields to me will always be good,
Mm.
and um, as long as you're able to consistently generate them, it can be a very viable strategy to counter some of the effects of the meta.
Well, let's not write off Lando just yet, because I do think that, and I wrote about this in an article on Deploy Your Leader Gaming. Shameless plug, go check that out. But I do think that Luke's strength, obviously, is being able to provide a shield. Lando's able to do that for the same cost as Luke, but on the same action. Yes, there are more conditions. I fully respect and admit that. But you talked previously about Poe not succeeding specifically because of how slow he is. Cutting
Mhm.
down your actions with something like Lando, I feel like helps him in this case not, grind to a halt in a way that Luke could potentially do because you have to spend the extra action to add that shield.
Yeah. I mean, action economy is always going to be important. Look, you're welcome to sell me on Lando. I will believe it when I see it.
Great.
Um, uh, there's something to be said for reliability of generating the thing that you're trying to generate. So I'll just leave it there. But it's a point well taken. Like they both have their benefits. As someone who played a lot of Luke Green in set one, I'm always going to favor that.
Yeah.
And I think both, if able to do what they want to do in shielding up units, I think that makes them both good considerations.
So let's transition over to hard control and things like Kira and Iden Versio. Um, you can obviously mix things like Palpatine into that. Even potentially something like a Yoda. Um, if we see an uptick in aggro decks, what do you think is going to happen as it relates to control now that, you know, we have things like DJ and Triple Dark Raid not wreaking havoc on the meta?
Well, I'll just speak to Kira first because I've always been a big fan of Kira Green.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I'm qualified enough to play it myself. I'm just not good enough at the game to do that. But in the hands of the best players, and specifically in the hands of the best Kira players, I feel like that's one of the strongest options you can choose.
Wow.
And so I really think that, um, well, I wouldn't be surprised if Kira makes a resurgence as well here. I think she has play into a lot of things, and and the folks that can play her well are, they're going to present real problems for you. So I like Kira quite a bit. Iden has kind of been around too as just like you know a go-to like hard control leader. The Iden blue deck probably being the most played.
Mm-hmm.
um,
That deck sucks.
and it's
So
definitely rough to play
it's so
against, but
frustrating.
it is viable. It is viable. And with villain blue now getting, no glory only results or whatever that card is. I mean,
Yep.
that's a big time card for blue control,
Yep.
blue villain control. So I would not be surprised if we see those decks crop up. But Kira to me is I think she could be really strong again, and I'm excited to see that potentially happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I would I think Kira's probably the stronger of the two, but I'd still rather see Kira across the table any day of the week. Just because
I gotta ask you though, Kevin, since we're
yeah.
on this subject of blue villain,
Yeah.
how come Thrawn's not on this list, bro? Like
You know,
Thrawn,
Thrawn
Thrawn,
just,
Thrawn is a leader that I thought maybe got better with this announcement too.
it's weird. I think outside of the some of the outliers that just never see play, I think there's a really long list of leaders that got better. And Thrawn's probably one of them. The new Thrawn we're talking about here, the one from Jump to Lightspeed, not the
Yes,
one from
sorry.
Spark of Rebellion.
Thank you for clarifying.
But,
Yes.
one, he didn't fall into either of these real archetypes. I suppose you could go heavy control with something like Thrawn. But it's also able to it's more of a mid-range deck in my experience because it's able to churn out some decent damage pretty quickly. Um,
Hmm.
I still haven't had the full time to experiment with Thrawn. Um, I do think that I like him in red, just because some of those units and some of those events like self destruct, which we revealed on this channel, is that's probably the one deck that'll ever run self destruct, and I'm honestly here for it. Um, and also like I'm still I'm waiting till showcase prices go down just that much more to try to get my hands on a showcase Thrawn. Um, but yeah, I just don't. He doesn't rise to the level for me of like a Vader or a Piet. Um,
Hmm.
so I've sort of held off on that for now. But if anybody's got some great Thrawn lists, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to see them
Yeah.
because he's definitely a really intriguing leader with a really cool ability that I want to be able to take advantage of whenever I can.
He's spicy, man.
Yeah,
He's spicy.
yeah,
And with his old buddy Krennic coming
yeah.
along for the ride, I mean, I don't know. There's something there, I think.
Yeah, you'd think I'd be chomping at the bit to play a deck that not only has Thrawn in it but Krennic.
Seriously.
I don't know what's going. I'm just swooning over Vader. I don't know what it is.
That's all right.
It's
Vader is well worthy of your swoon.
yeah. Well, let's hope so, because otherwise it's going to be a really long few months until Vegas. All right. Well, so I hope some of this discourse is giving you some ideas about new decks you want to try out. If there's one we didn't talk about that you think is worth checking out by us or by anyone who's watching, drop it in the comments below. Again, I do think there were so many decks that got better as a result of these suspensions, and I'll be really interested to see what comes out of the next PQ or SQ that we get results from. But before I let you go, Corwin, we did get some other news very recently, and that is, of course, Legends of the Force. We
Yes.
finally saw some of the special rarity cards. We saw who the leaders are for the Spotlight decks. It is Darth Maul and Qui-Gon Jinn. We finally have a Qui-Gon in Star Wars Unlimited,
Finally.
which is awesome. This key art is really cool because it's got a lot of things that we can get excited about. Stuff from the Ahsoka series, Mother
Mhm.
Talzin, which I've been waiting for a Night Sisters deck. Really stoked about that. And then
Yeah.
potentially a new Yoda, whether that's a leader or a unit, remains to be seen. So, we're not going to go through every card because we're coming up against it a little bit in terms of time. But I do want to get your sense on what you think of what Legends of the Force has revealed so far with the Force token and some of the synergies that we've already seen.
Yeah, I'm here for it. I love my Force users, and Qui-Gon Jinn is one of my favorite Star Wars characters. Really excited to see him in the game. He looks like he has an awesome ability,
Yeah,
so I'll be excited to try him out. Another cunning option, Kevin.
yeah, yeah.
No shortage of them,
Cunning doesn't go anywhere.
but yeah, the Force, and I really like the I personally like the design of the force token a lot because
Mhm.
it's gonna really reward good sequencing in gameplay,
Yep.
which is something I've always really cared about. And so that to me feels like a really cool mechanic.
Yeah, and I'll say this much about the Force token: I will definitely be looking for an actual token and not the card that
Oh,
it
of
comes on.
course.
I liked the idea they gave about flipping something upside down and right side up, but I want to do that with a token and
Yes.
not a card because that's I'm big on not clogging up the play area, which is why I got some sweet Darth Vader piloting tokens made, so I can keep my.
Those are really
They're
nice.
really nice.
I have to say, they are really
If
nice.
you haven't seen those, they're courtesy of Laser Gaming. Go check them out on my social media. And by my social media, I mean our social media, except I'm the one who runs it and makes all the comments. So get mad at me if I say anything that you don't like. Uh, leave Corwin alone. Um, I was a little disappointed. I'm not gonna lie. I was a little disappointed by the new Darth Maul leader. I was.
Mm,
I don't see the power level there. I was disappointed that we have another 6 deploy leader with 6 health. Like they just
yeah.
did that, bro. Come on. Like why my guy Maul only have to have 6 health? Like that stinks. Darth Maul's lightsaber is awesome, but it also doesn't work on half the Mauls that are out there, which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
kind of a bummer, like a really big bummer. Like so you're basically using it on the leader or the legendary unit from set 3 and that's it.
Mhm.
So that sucks. But obviously, if you can get that off and you can do 2 9 power attacks with overwhelm, you're feeling pretty good.
Yes.
I really
That
like
is
the
true.
new Savage. You're
Yeah.
gonna get you want to talk about sequencing. You're gonna get punished if you don't sequence Savage correctly. But
Yeah, and I don't think we have another unit in the game that's bringing 9 power for 6 resources, right? I'm pretty sure that doesn't exist anywhere else yet.
that seems like something we would know about if it did exist.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So
So
although
you could.
technically, if you have Piet flipped and you play a Devastator, that's 9 power on 6 resources.
Yes, of course.
Yeah,
Printed cost.
yeah,
Printed
right,
cost.
right, right. Yeah. So I'm excited to see what else comes of this. I think it's going to be a fun set. I'm already literally drooling and salivating over the new Carbonite boxes, with
Yes.
Darth Vader on the box art, and we it was confirmed this week that they're going to be the prestige cards are going to be unique force units. So
Yep.
by the transitive property, that means there's going to be a prestige Vader, and I need to get my hands on it immediately. And I'm going to have to try to maintain self control to not spend an insane amount of money on a serialized version of that, if such a thing exists. Because, you know, 2 weeks after Legends of the Force releases, we've got to go to Vegas and compete in the Galactic Championships.
Yep. That's right. So it's going to be a mad dash in those first 2 weeks for sure. But I agree. The set art looks great. The concept, obviously, being a force heavy set, I love that. I'm excited to get more force units in the game and to get more iconic characters in the game. And I'm glad that they're starting to spread out into like the newest, series too. Like the
Yep.
fact we're gonna get Ahsoka characters is really cool for me.
And
This early on in the game.
and Jedi Fallen Order / Survivor characters, which is
That's
also
right.
really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's going to do it for us today. What's your favorite part about these suspensions? What excites you about what's coming for the future of Star Wars Unlimited? Let us know in the comments below. If you liked what you saw here today, please drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new. That helps us out a lot. And we're happy to be back. We're happy to continue to play and talk and interact Star Wars Unlimited. So we're just gonna keep doing that for as long as we can. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Thank you for making it this far. For my brother Corwin, I am Kevin, signing off.